You're tuned into RBLR, the home of Tampa Bay's Reveler Sports.
4 seconds left. In front. Happy moment. The Tampa Bay Lightning have won the first Stanley Cup. And the Tampa Bay Lightning have won the Stanley Cup. Lightning strikes twice. The Tampa Bay Lightning win their second straight Stanley Cup.
Welcome back to RBLR Lightning. As always, my name is Jake Ricker. Alongside me, it's Joe Zanataro, Matt Gannon. Guys, welcome back to the show. We are continuing our report card series today. For those of you guys who may have missed our earlier episodes on the report card series, I highly recommend you go check them out because we got some awesome episodes out there. You can go right back here on YouTube and check out those old episodes. They're also on any other streaming platform that you are listening on. And if you're right here on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes just like this one. And guys, today we're talking about Mikey Eyssimont, Nick Paul, and Ross Colton. I think there's a lot of interesting conversations to have about these guys. I can't wait to get into it. Before we do that, though, if you guys can, right now, Creative Loafing is doing the Best of the Bay. All the nominations are going through there. So if you're over there and you're nominating your favorite place for your favorite Cuban sandwich and stuff like that, if you could head over to the entertainment section and the best podcast section, drop a nomination for RBLR Sports. We would really appreciate it if you guys are enjoying the content here. Go over there and give us a nomination. The link to Creative Loafing's website will be on the Twitter feed at RBLR Sports. So go over there and check it out if you can. We would really appreciate it.
Yeah, Creative Loafing's pretty cool magazine for the Tampa Bay area. I mean, they are nationwide, but when they feature some of the best of the Bay, it's really neat. You know, as Jake mentioned, like the Cuban sandwiches, that's one thing that I always look forward to every year, to see who in the Tampa Bay area is making the best Cuban sandwich, and go check out those restaurants. And it'd be really neat to see us listed in there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, with that said, let's jump right into it and start talking about some of these players. So we're going to start off with Mikey Eyssimont, who, guys, there's not a lot of game footage, if you will, to really go off of and look at what he's done for us. But I'll tell you what, in the little games that we did see of Eyssimont, I think he was one of the best players on the Lightning this season, excuse me. And I truly do mean that, because he was a man on a mission every time he was out there on the ice. He was winning puck battles. He was the hardest worker. He got so much speed to his game. It was really impressive. In those 15 games played, 1 goal, 1 assist for 2 total points. So again, nothing much that really shocks you when you look at the stat sheet, but his work ethic, I think, is where Eyssimont really shined this year.
Yeah, he had already won over a lot of hearts in Bolts Nation with his similar play style to Yanni Gourde. A lot of people are drawing the comparisons to, rightfully so. Like that work ethic you're talking about, Jake, just being an absolute buzzsaw style of player who never gives up, never cares about who he's going into the corner against. He just plays way bigger than he actually is. Meanwhile, also having a tremendous amount of speed and grit alongside of that. Despite not having, a crazy stat line for the regular season, playoffs were a little bit better, but only a small sample size. He thoroughly impressed. There's a lot of, casual fans, I'll call them, that are, remembering number 23 and just the small sample size he did have. And if those casual fans are getting hooked on this guy, that's a really big statement coming from him in just such a small amount of games already.
Yeah, and I mean, those comparisons being made between him and Yanni Gourde have been completely appropriate. He's a guy that's flying in there, stirring stuff up, and doing a great job at it. And I mean, he's not only got the attention of casual fans, but he obviously also got the attention of Julien Brisebois, who already got an extension for him. And I think this is a really friendly contract for the Lightning. It's $800,000 a year for the cap hit, and it's a 2-year, almost like a bridge deal. Let's see what this kid can do, sort of thing. But it locks down a guy that was starting to work really well within our system. We know he can play, and starts answering. He was, it's pretty much one of the first puzzle pieces that JBB's putting together to figure out what all these postseason signings are going to end up looking like.
I felt like every time he was in the lineup in the playoffs that the Lightning just played better because that energy that he brought to the team, you could notice throughout the entire lineup. I mean, it was, again, like we said, small sample size, but from what we saw, it was really impressive. If he kind of takes a Brandon Hagel approach, if you will, still taking some time to adjust and get used to the team, get used to the system, and then who knows what he could do next year if he really starts to get comfortable here. And maybe we see him become the next Ross Colton, the next Nick Perbix, that guy that keeps popping up for the Lightning and making such a huge impact, which is how they're able to make deep runs every single year. Let's go to the grades. For my grade, guys, I'm going with a B+. I know we talk very highly about him here. I can't give him the A just because his offensive production wasn't fantastic. It's not a huge knock on him, though, because, again, he wasn't here the entire season, only played 15 games, all that other stuff. But just purely because of his work ethic and the amazing play that we did see from him, easy but B+ for me.
Yeah, I mean, 15 games, he only had 2 points, and then he got his bell rung a little bit by McCabe with that hit right at the blue line. After that, he came back, and in the postseason, he had 2 points in the 3 games that he played. It takes a while to get used to your teammates and the system and get fully adjusted, so it's a smart call, Jake, not fully judging him just on his point production alone. Wasn't expecting him to be an impact player first time coming in, but then playing as well as he did in the playoffs where he was noticeable out there. I actually agree with your rating. I think that's, perfect, a B+.
All both of you guys have put it perfectly so far. There's not really much more I could say about it. There's nothing really left to be said. I mean, he's a very, very hard worker, and he's impressed thoroughly with how he's been with us. And yeah, he had a really strong playoffs for the game he was in. I can't give him anything lower than a B+. I think we got a unanimous vote here for the first time.
I was just going to say, is this the first time we have ever all given a B+, same grade to a player? Guys, I think we got to celebrate this. I don't know if this is ever going to happen again. Here's how we're going to celebrate it. Guys, if you want to head over to the merch store that we have, shop.rblrsports.com. I'm going to give you an exclusive code to get 10% off of your order. That's code BOLTS for 10% off. You can check out the Rays, the Bucks, the Rowdies, the Lightning inspired merch that we have over there. There's some crazy cool t-shirts. Highly recommend you go check them out. Link, as always, will be in the description. Shop.rblrsports.com, and you guys can use code BOLTS for 10% off of your order.
Way to seize the opportunity to throw that in there.
Absolutely. I don't know if it's we haven't agreed on, I don't think, on anything almost this entire report card series, but we got the trifecta there with the B+, and it's a well-deserved B+ for Eyssimont. Hopefully he continues to grow and becomes one of the top players for the Lightning next year. Would absolutely love to see it. Now let's go to another guy who came over late during the trade deadline season, and that's Nick Paul. Now, Nick Paul, guys, he had an interesting season, to say the least. Now, Joe, I know before the show you were looking at some stats, and you found some things that were pretty interesting, so I'm going to let you take it here.
Yeah, so I've actually been a little bit vocal throughout the season with this particular aspect of Nick Paul and the Lightning. If you look at the first 24 games that he played this season, he actually was pretty productive. He ended up having 12 goals. Let's see, did I get that right? Let's see, is it 11 goals? I'm sorry, 11 goals, 7 assists, 18 total points over 24 games, about 0.75 points per game average. After game 24, though, Anthony Cirelli came back, and it was the opinion of Cooper to put Cirelli on the second line and drop Paul down to the third. Well, with Paul dropped down to the third, his production took, I was going to say a nosedive, face plant, just absolutely fell off a cliff. Yeah, and hit hard. He had a total of 14 points over the next 58 games. He missed, I think, 2 games in the season. And you could see that he didn't look quite as good of a player out there. He wasn't nearly as noticeable. And I really think that's just because he was being misused. It's really hard to say that, that Coop does anything wrong ever. and to criticize him. I mean, he is such a master, but I think this is one aspect that I really would like to have seen the Lightning change. When Cirelli came in, he ended up playing 58 games total, and he had 29 points. So he's actually a 0.5 point per game average. I don't think it's outside the reality to say that Nick Paul could have kept up at least that average throughout the rest of the season. And with the way that Cirelli is, I think he's a bit more of a playmaker. He's more of a driving force on a line, and I think he would have been able to bring up the third line to be better, where Paul is more of a role player within a line. And I think that really affected his Paul's stats for the whole season.
I know what you mean, Joe. I think there would have been a little bit of a regression, even if he didn't get bumped down to that second line. I think we would have seen him, average out to the mean. Half a point per game, though, if that's what he regressed to, that would be awesome. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. He really did hit a brick wall. You guys remember, everybody remembers who listens to this show, how much I was ranting and raving about Nick Paul, how he was the best player in the NHL for a short period of time.
Nick Paul does it all.
He does it all. I mean, a nickname like that doesn't just get thrown at you for no reason. I don't know what it was. It sounds bad saying this, but I would hope it was like injury related or something, because it seemed like Nick Paul hit a wall. It really was a steep drop off. I don't know what it was, but you would see all these fancy plays he'd be making with his stick, especially with his skates. He had some of the best feet and legs for a big frame guy like that, and it just the skill seemed to vanish very supernatural like. It just disappeared. I'm not sure what happened. I don't think he is, his season was as bad as, I might be making it out to be. I think he was still very good defensively. I think he's underrated with that, but it just seemed like he wasn't getting into any open chances. I don't think he's much of a play creator. I see him more as a goal scorer finisher. He's got a wicked shot, but I just never really saw him getting into the tough and prime scoring areas. Something fell off with him. I would like to attribute it to Cirelli pushing him down in the lineup, but you'd want to see a little bit of pushback from Nick Paul if that's what it was. So I really do think it might have been slightly injury related. I'm hoping so. It sounds macabre saying that, but I'm just trying to justify such a deep drop off.
Think about the majority of the season. He had Nemesnikov that he was playing with, who couldn't do anything to get started. He just didn't have a line to really help support him, and one guy can't go end to end and do it all. I mean, looking through our lineup, he really had no help in order to do much on that third line in terms of somebody that can pass him the puck. Because he's got the body in order to get into those scoring areas. He's got the size to be able to do it.
Yeah, we could attribute it to a lot of things. I think that's a really good one. I know Nemesnikov, I hate kicking him while he's down. It feels like he was the punching bag on this platform, but there could be a good answer as to why. I mean, he, like you were saying, he's more of a role player. He's not much of a line driver. And when you've got a line just full of, role players, it sounds rude saying that. I see what you're saying, Joe.
I've got a couple words for you guys. Yips, snake bitten. I feel like he just kind of hit a really tough wall and couldn't get a hold of things for a little while. And I don't know. I see what you're saying, Joe. Like, that makes sense. He was bumped down to a lower line. It's going to hurt his production no matter. It's going to happen to any player. However, the Lightning have so much talent on their team that I think, most part, players should be able to perform on almost any line. I think something that also really hurt him is because, again, he took the opposite approach of Brandon Hagel. He got hot really early when he first came over for the Lightning. So the bar went through the roof for Nick Paul. And I think he wasn't quite, although he was kind of doing that early on in the season, as you were mentioning, but I think the bar got set so high for him that when he did, listen, every player hits slumps. It's going to happen. Steven Stamkos had one not too long ago. I think it might have even been this year where he had a little bit of a slump for a while. It's going to happen to guys. I would fully expect Nick Paul to break out of that as well. I also don't always see him as just a pure goal scorer. He's showed that he can absolutely do that and come up in huge moments, but this is a big physical guy. He's also very fast, that can get down, get the puck, and be a big physical presence when needed. So he definitely had a disappointing year. There's a lot of different things that you could look at and point in as the reason to why that happened. But I don't think, as down on him as maybe some other people are, just in general.
I'm going to offer a tinfoil hat theory real quick. I'm thinking that Brandon Hagel and Nick Paul are just unable to succeed at the same time. It seems like when they both came over to the team, Nick Paul was he was the one that was doing everything, and Hagel had a hard time assimilating, and he carried over, through the playoffs and into the start of this. I guess now it's last season, I suppose. The most recent season, it took Hagel a little bit to get going. Despite him ending up with 30 goals, it took him a little bit to get that first goal. Meanwhile, Nick Paul, he was white hot. So as soon as Hagel started picking it up, I think Paul started dropping off. That's just my tinfoil hat theory. They can't succeed at the same time.
Well, hopefully they'll be able to figure out and get it going together. Let's go to the grades here. So for Nick Paul, I'm going to go with a C. I think average is the best way to put it here. He got off to a hot start. You have to give him credit for that. And then he did fall off and took a big nosedive, as we talked about. I do think he still did some other things right. I think he was a good physical presence for the Lightning, which they have often needed in years past as well. So I'm going to go with a C for my grade.
I'll agree with you, Jake. I don't want there to be too much agreeing here, but a C sounds about right. He had a very average season when you boil it down. He did a lot of things good, but man, when you hit that wall, it's hard to give him a lot of his cookies. If he could just be a little bit more consistent, not as streaky, that grade is bound to come up, and I think he's going to be having a higher grade next year.
We're not going to go back to back on all three agreeing here, are we?
C minus.
Little variety.
Just had to throw the minus in there.
Yeah, had to throw the minus. I just, he started off playing so well, and I think it's, again, I really believe, I fully believe it's based on where he was put in the lineup. He wasn't able to get going after being dropped from the top line, but I expect more out of him, and unfortunately, I feel like he was a victim of circumstance once Cirelli came back. So it's not entirely his fault, but it was less than stellar season for him, and his point production, shows it. His point per game rate is, lower than he's had in previous seasons. Even even in a season in Ottawa, he played better. So yeah, C minus.
So a C overall grade. I think that's very fair what you're saying, Joe. I don't disagree with that at all. Hopefully he's able to bounce back next year. Listen, he's signed long-term. He's going to be a big part of this team. He still is a big part of this team. And there's no reason to think that this is something that's going to continue for Nick Paul. Hopefully it's just a little fluke and he bounces back to his regular old self in the next season. So our third and final player is probably the one of the most interesting ones on this list, just because we don't know if he's going to be back next year. We might have seen his last game in a Lightning uniform. I sure hope not, but that's Ross Colton. So Ross Colton obviously came up out of nowhere for the Lightning, was huge for them in their Stanley Cup runs, especially against the Montreal Canadiens when he scored the game-winning goal in the Stanley Cup Finals to clinch it all for the Bolts. But this year, guys, he has 81 games played, 16 goals, 16 assists for 32 points. And I think this is interesting because I would imagine a lot of people, most Lightning fans, would have said, Ross Colton was good, but he wasn't fantastic like we felt like he was in 2021 to 2022. But when you look at the stats, they're actually very similar. In 21 to 2022, he had 79 games played, 22 goals, 17 assists for 39 points. So not too much of a difference when you look at the pure offensive stats for Ross Colton, but I don't know about you guys. I think a lot of people would agree in saying that it kind of felt like he didn't have as good of a season as he did last year.
Well, I think that's definitely fair to say. He's again the bottom six. I think it's going to be pretty hard to point out anybody that had an outstanding year. And he's fallen into that category as somebody that just didn't really produce as much as you would hope, especially when you're looking for production in your lines that aren't, hosted by Steven Stamkos or Nikita Kucherov. And, to actually have a slight regression from last year in terms of points, especially when it comes to goal scoring, despite him putting in more power play goals than last year. It really shows 5-on-5 how he had a pretty big dip in his productivity, and that's, I want more out of him. I really would like for him to sign with the Lightning and continue to mature with the Bolts, but hopefully it's also a very, very cap-friendly contract after what I would say is a slightly below average year.
Yeah, he did have a little bit of a step back, but we can see that there's still a lot of tools there. I mean, he is, don't take this the wrong way, but I think he plays a sloppy style of hockey, and not for the worst, but I think he's just a loose kind of player. He's very crisp with his shot. He's got a very good shot, but when it comes to his passing and his skating, he almost looks like a little bit of a baby deer out there, if you know what I mean. But it works to his advantage. I think he's got a lot of pieces to his game that go unnoticed. I want to say before Tanner Jeannot came to the team, he led the team in hits by a forward, and I would call him a bit of an undersized guy. I want to say he's right around on that 6 foot cusp. Which in today's league,
194.
Is he okay? Yeah, so not undersized, but definitely not on the bigger side. To be leading your team in hits as a forward, and he would lay some pretty decent checks. They were never anything crazy, but I see a lot of potential there, and I think the Lightning do as well. When he came up with the Lightning in 2021, late in the season, I mean, everybody fell in love with him pretty quickly. He became a fan favorite really quick. And I think there's still a lot of untapped potential that we need to find there. I think he had a pretty decent season. I'd say pretty on par for, sticking on the third line, second power play for pretty much the entirety of the year. Yes. Would you like to see a little more goals out of him? Yes. I think that's what we all expect him to be, is a goal scorer, but he wasn't quite as streaky as Nick Paul. But he had a pretty consistent season throughout. I want to see him, work on his shot a little bit. Joe, I'm still gonna maintain that Kucherov is a better one-timer than him. I'll never let that die. But I'd like to see him get more passes. I'd like to see him open up his wheelhouse a little bit more. But again, not untapped potential, but just he needs to unlock a little bit more out of his game. And I think it just might be a product of being buried on a stacked team.
There definitely is skill there, and there's more that I want to see out of him. I think he's far from hitting his potential.
I do have to give him credit for the playoffs as well. In the 6 games played, he had a goal and 3 assists. So he had a pretty decent postseason as well, was able to get the scoring up late in the season. Unfortunately, you probably would have hoped to see more goals maybe, but for what it's worth out of everybody else on the Lightning team, he looked pretty good in the postseason. So he definitely did have not as great of a season. Hey, maybe him not having the season like he did last year is actually going to help the Lightning in contract negotiations, and maybe that helps bring him back for another year or two. Maybe the Lightning are looking for and saying, hey, you can sign a 1-year deal. The cap's going up big time next year. So sign a 1-year deal, prove it, and we'll give you a big contract next year. Maybe that's something the Lightning could do as well with Ross Colton. There's a lot of different ways you could go. Do you guys think he comes back?
I'd like to say that he'd be able to come back. I think I'm not sure what his UFA status is, but I think if we'd be able to sign him for like one thing that would kind of look stupid at first, and hear me out, but if we sign him to like a 1-year deal, and let's say he's still restricted after that year, and you not stat pad him, but essentially what we did with Vlad Nemesnikov, where when he was on the team originally, play him on the first line, kind of pump up his stats a little bit, and then trade him at the deadline for a pretty decent haul, while still having the team that he gets traded to still owning his RFA rights. That adds a little bit more value to it. I could see something like that happen, because I don't see him in the long-term future for this team, and I think a lot of teams want him. I think if we can, ink out a team and player-friendly deal, kind of a prove-it deal almost, I think it'd be interesting, but I might be galaxy braining here a bit.
I don't think you're too far off base. When it comes to the salary cap, though, I'm pretty certain that everything is hinging on Alex Killorn. If he signs, and for what amount if he does, it's going to completely change the landscape in terms of what's available for other players. Yeah, Ross Colton was only at a 1.125 mil per year deal before. It's not a huge hit for the team if you were to sign something similar. And, RFA with arbitration rights, you'd think that after a season like this, he's not going to be able to negotiate something that's too ridiculous in value. But if he wants more, you gotta let him walk unless he can actually prove that he has an ability to really up those numbers and help drive a line. He's got to be the driving factor in order to be earning more. I'd love to see him come back, and I want him to be that role player. And just, we're just going to have to wait and see what sort of magic JBB pulls with.
If there's anybody, Matt, you were saying that maybe kind of galaxy braining it, but if there's anybody that can pull something like that off, it's JBB. He's gotten some amazing deals done for the Lightning. He is an RFA, I do believe. And so, worst case, maybe the Lightning can maybe get some draft capital back from him. I don't know what he's going to get on the open market if he does leave, but I could easily see Ross Colton signing a bridge type of deal, if you will. Especially considering that the cap space over in the NHL is ready to go up a lot with all the things that have been going on with league revenues and escrow payments and all that fun stuff. So let's go to grades, though. Matt, I'll start with you this time. What's your grade for Ross Colton?
I want to defer to Joe first because I want to be last on this one. I want to see what you guys say.
All right.
I'm actually going to assign the same grade that Nick Paul had. I'm going to go with a C-. I expect a lot more out of the guy, and that whole third line was struggling. So I know it's not 100% his fault, but he still, I don't think, was able to earn anything more than that.
I'm going to go with a C+. And the reason I do that is because I mean, I don't think he had a worse season, which is why I can't give him a B. But I don't think it was as bad as it was compared to last season. So just looking at the two seasons, we loved them last year. And so it's hard for me to go too low. He definitely regressed. You definitely expecting more of him, which is so difficult on this Lightning team. Everybody's expectations are so high. But I'm going to go with a C+.
I'm going to go C-, and it's interesting. I think we all talk about Colton in a different way, probably not as down as, at least I was on Nick Paul, despite Nick Paul finishing with more goals. They were tied in points. Colton had just one more assist, Paul one more goal. But I think just the consistency level, it was there throughout the season, but I don't know. I think that we could see a lot more out of Ross Colton. I think he honestly might have a bit of a higher ceiling than Nick Paul, so I was expecting a little bit more for him this year. And I don't think he took that step, but he still was a very valuable player in his role.
So a C overall for Ross Colton. Going to be really interesting to see how this all works out with him in free agency. Of course, don't forget, if you like and subscribe right here on the channel, we'll be sure to cover all of that, whether Ross Colton is coming back. If he's not, who could be his replacement? There's a lot to dive into and look in there. We'll have to wait and see what JBB does. Unfortunately, we're at the point now where we just got to sit and wait a little bit. Sounds like they've made some contract offers, but until they get announced, we'll have to wait and see here. Before we wrap things up, guys, I do want to mention, obviously, the Stanley Cup Finals have come to a conclusion, and the Vegas Golden Knights are the Stanley Cup champions. But more importantly, Marchessault was named the MVP for the Stanley Cup playoffs, a former Lightning Bolt. So I wanted to give a congratulations to him. He's a guy that he was only here for 2 seasons, and even in those 2 seasons, only played a couple of the games early on there. But, I think he kind of got his first little, bit of attention, if you will, here in Tampa Bay. It was a bummer the Lightning had to lose him, mostly due to cap constraints and because they were so good during that time. But congratulations to Marchessault on winning the Conn Smythe.
Is that who you were thinking?
For Conn Smythe, who I thought was going to win. Yes, I do. I mean, he was really good for Vegas. He's been there the whole entire time. I know Eichel played really well, but I don't love, even though it's the playoff award, I don't love the idea of giving it to a guy that kind of just jumped in late. Marchessault still played as well as Eichel did, and he was one of those original 6 in Vegas.
I was thinking Stone was going to get it after the hat trick in Game 5, but I think Marchessault is the correct way to do it. Stone was the first one to get the cup. Marchessault being an OG Golden Misfit, I think it was actually pretty cool.
Yeah, Marchie really was like outstanding in the playoffs. He played, I thought, a lot better than his regular season. Looking at him, 13 goals in the 22 games played, 25 points, and more than a point per game average. He's a decent player, but in the regular season, he's, last year was his closest to ever being point per game, and that was 66 points in 76 games played. He really stepped it up for the playoffs. It always felt like, I want to see what his shooting percentage is here, because it always felt like he was just in the perfect spot to bury it. It's not like a one-timer came across or a rebound. Yeah, 16%, 16.3% shooting percentage. A lot of his shots were, or a lot of his goals were a moving puck that came right to him, and he just completely buried it. So yeah, I mean, he's a decent player. He's someone that definitely deserves it. I'm not completely convinced that there's any world that we should have even considered keeping him on the Lightning, but good for him.
Didn't he only play? He only played like less than 82 games, right? Like not even a full season.
I got his stats up, so I can tell you exactly. It's 45 games, and he had a total of 18 points. Was a -10 in 15-16. It was 15-16 the season that we went to.
That was when we lost to Pittsburgh and
then Pittsburgh won the cup.
2015 was when we went to the finals.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, I mean, that was a decent team because we lost in the Eastern Conference Championship, right? Is that Eastern Conference Finals?
I believe so. Yes. He was a good player, and I think if they had the cap space, I think they would have kept him. But it's hard to predict what these guys are going to do. Who knew Marchessault was going to become as good of a player as he did? And to be fair, I think part of the big reason he did flourish is because he got top 6 minutes in Vegas. He wasn't going to get that in Tampa. Maybe he never gets anywhere close to that if he stays with the Lightning. So you can't sit here and say, oh, well, we should have kept him. He's been such a high scorer. He may not have never gotten to that level.
We had
the Lightning.
Yeah, I don't think there was a chance. We had Kucherov, Drouin, Palat, Point, of course Stamkos, and then Killer still would be someone that would take him out of that spot. But we also had Tyler Johnson that was on the team.
I don't think Braden Point played with him though. That's something to consider
Point
too.
Had 68 games that season, 68 games and 40 points.
That was the 2016-17 though. That was his first year, I'm pretty sure.
That's yeah, that's what I'm saying. That for the for the next season coming up, who are you going to check out of that lineup?
Okay.
Maybe in a different world, he does stick with the Lightning and he does play as well. But you also can't sit here. The Lightning went to 3 straight Stanley Cup Finals, 1 back-to-back cups. It's hard to complain about anything that the Lightning did at the end of the day.
The people you can feel the worst for, if any Lightning fans are complaining about losing Marchessault, imagine being a Florida fan right now, trading him to Vegas so they select Riley Smith instead of another player. And then he becomes the Conn Smythe winner. That's kicking you while you're down.
Florida definitely handled it a lot worse than the Lightning did, which is unfortunate for them. I should mention too, I almost forgot about this. The Lightning did make a signing today, and that was Cole Koepke, who they signed to a 1-year, 2-way contract at a cap hit of $775,000. Koepke had a weird year. He was with the Lightning early on, wasn't able to stick with the team, and then down in the AHL this year, 52 games played, 7 goals, 12 assists, and 19 points. But Koepke, a guy that could potentially maybe make an impact on the Lightning next season. He did have a couple of games early on in this year, but he was beat out by, well, let's be honest, guys like Balcers, Perbix, and Radish, even though Perbix and Radish are defenders. They were the guys from the Crunch that really were able to jump up this year. But Koepke still a big piece of the Syracuse Crunch team, and some guy that maybe if he's able to get things rolling right away could make an impact for the Lightning next season.
Yeah, I don't see him really making the opening night roster, but I think he's a serviceable guy to plug any injury holes. That's what he did at the start of last year. I think he was good enough in his role doing that.
And anything to shuffle up the bottom 6.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, that's going to do it for us, guys, in this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on the future episodes. Don't forget, if you are wanting to go nominate us for Best Podcast, we really appreciate it. Again, Creative Loafing is doing that. The link is on Twitter at RBLR Sports. You can go and find it there. Thank you guys so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you in the next one. Go Bolts.
Thank you for tuning into this presentation by RBLR Sports. On your way out of the stadium, please remember to like and subscribe.